This is only going to get worse for Russia as Ukraine continues to develop their capabilities. And it also highlights that what traditionally has been Russia's strength was its vastness. The fact that Russia was so big and so deep, and they could always defeat any invader by just continuously withdrawing into the vastness of Russia. Now, the Ukrainians have the ability to hit everything, that there is no way to hide, and that the Russians cannot defend all of these critical facilities. And so what once was a strength is now a vulnerability. And again, I think this only gets worse for the Russians. I have always believed that Crimea was the decisive terrain of this war, that, the Russians, for them, having Crimea was so important geostrategically, but also psychologically. For the Ukrainians, they have to get Crimea back, because if they don't, then they'll never be able to go up into the Azov Sea and never be able to rebuild their two ports of Mariupol and Berdansk. And Russia would always be able to use Crimea as a launching pad against Ukrainian shipping and so on. So for the Ukrainians, they have to eventually get it back, and that's why they could not, in any peace negotiation, settle for Russia keeping Crimea. The way that they eventually get it back is, number one, isolating Crimea, cutting off Russian access to it. Eventually that big Kerch Bridge is going to go, but also by being able to interdict Russian traffic moving along the highways that lead to Crimea, make it where it's isolated. Secondly, make it unusable or untenable for the Russians by constantly striking Russian air bases, seaports, all the facilities on Crimea. The Ukrainians now have the ability to hit all of these. So make it untenable for the Russians to stay there. And then thirdly, I think, which is the hard part, it's going to take some more time, by continuing to put enormous economic pressure on Russia through the destruction of Russia's oil and gas exports. It becomes, at some point, the Russians are not able to sustain their forces there in Crimea. This is how I think the Ukrainians eventually do this. I think it's going to be interesting now that we're approaching the summer, when Russian tourists go to Crimea, to their favorite beaches on the Black Sea, and they will notice increased defensive preparations. They'll start wondering, and this is a problem for Putin and his team, that as Russians more and more realize that this war has turned into a disaster for them, just like the hundreds of drone strikes that hit all around Moscow the other day. This will remind the Russian people that after all these years, with Russia having every advantage, they are even further away from defeating Ukraine than they were when it started. So I think that will be something I'd be interested in. But clearly, if they're investing in the defensive preparations of Crimea, it's because they would fear some sort of amphibious operation or landing, and I think those are resources that the Russians really cannot afford to lose right now, to use. But I hope that the Ukrainians are causing the Russians to waste resources, to threaten things like possibility of landings in Crimea, to make it difficult for the Russian side. The character of naval warfare has changed significantly, at least if you're talking about on smaller enclosed seas like the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea and the Adriatic and other more enclosed maritime places like that. The fact that no ship out in the middle of the Black Sea or the Baltic Sea is out of range, or can hide anywhere. That's a dramatic change. And now that the Ukrainians have demonstrated that they have maritime drones that can be used and navigated and operated, steered even hundreds of kilometers away, and get up against a targeted ship. That's significant. That is a real threat that nations are going to have to figure out how do they defend against that threat. And so it was a combination of maritime drones, unmanned aerial systems, long-range anti-ship missiles, and special operators and cruise missiles. I mean, that's pretty much what has helped Ukraine win the Battle of the Black Sea, even though they don't have many vessels that you would find in a traditional navy. What's significant about it is that the Ukrainians continue to hit strategic targets. They're not just hitting apartment buildings or hospitals or the kind of targets that the Russians hit. They went after pumping stations, factories that make critical components. I mean, very good military targets that are necessary for Russia's oil and gas export, as well as Russian defense industry. These are the kind of targets that are being hit. And what's impressive to me is the Russians knew that the Ukrainians would be coming after this, and they had brought all their air defense back in and around Moscow, and still a lot got through. I mean, the Russians obviously did knock down some of these things, but the Ukrainians have demonstrated that they can penetrate Russian air defenses. It's hard to predict when this war ends. It feels like the momentum has changed irreversibly, unless the Ukrainians make a huge strategic error and decide to do something that plays into Russia's strengths. Or if Europe completely fails to continue supporting Ukraine. Otherwise, it feels to me that we're closer to the end than we are to the beginning. I'd say it like that. But that assumes that Ukraine continues to improve its ability to strike against Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, and that Ukrainian people continue to believe and support what's being done here. Ukraine obviously has suffered a lot of casualties also, but they seem so much more resilient. I mean, they're defending their country, whereas the Russians are not defending their country. I doubt you could find a lot of Russian troops that really want to be there. But I have underestimated over the past couple of years the willingness of the Russian leadership to accept these enormous casualties. And so we'll see. At some point, people around Putin, whether it's the military or the oligarchs or somebody, says, that's enough. I just don't know when that is.